All right, today I'm going to do something a bit different from Dead by Daylight because, frankly, I am burned out of Dead by Daylight. It's been over 2 years strong, and what can I say? I'm over it. So, instead, today I am going to go over the sequel to probably one of my favorite games in the last couple years, Dying Light. And so, we're going to go over Dying Light 2 together. And I'm going to share my thoughts on how it worked, what worked for it, what didn't, and basically how does it compare to the first one. But first, I'm going to start this off with Dying Light 2 on its own merits, going over gameplay, combat, story, atmosphere, and then comparing it to the first one with all those, and basically just that's the roadmap for how it's going to go. Alright, so if you know anything about Dying Light, its gimmick is basically parkour and zombies. And in terms of Dying Light 2, the parkour system's pretty smooth. I would say actually smoother than the first one. Your the process of chaining parkour set pieces is pretty fun, and it's a good way to just get around the city. So, that's the main meat, I guess you could say, of the game is running around a big empty city and jumping from piece to piece. Now, the physics though of Dying Light, when what's his name? I don't remember his name, but the main character of Dying Light 2, when he jumps, it feels very feathery. Like he kind of jumps like a cartoon character where you press up and then it goes like and goes up even further. And I mean, it just it's okay for what it does, and it makes the game a little bit easier. But it feels just like cartoon physics, which kind of goes against the whole post-apocalyptic vibe, you could say. Um, in general, the game pretty much plays like a first-person Assassin's Creed in a lot of ways, where you're climbing up walls, you're setting up hits, observing below you, running from people, a lot of that, and fighting. But basically more in a first person thing. That's Dying Light 2. The combat in this game is okay. You pretty much just face people. That's typically what you're fighting, and a lot of what you're doing is you're surrounded by like 2 to 5 people, maybe more, and they swing at you. You can swing back at them. You can dodge them. You can parry them, but in the end, that's about it. There's not much to the combat system here. Alright, now let's get into the story of Dying Light. Um, well, really 1 and 2. I think it's no controversy here to say that both those stories are shit, but focusing specifically on Dying Light 2, it's very unnecessarily convoluted. Now, there was a big part of the selling point when they were marketing this game, saying pretty much the peacekeepers, who are like the police faction, versus the I don't know, the hippie alliance or the hippie people, basically the peace and love kind of guys. Basically, you can choose between those factions of which one you want to side with, but in the main story, it really doesn't matter that much. I mean, they don't really go at odds. They actually kind of work together until like the very last mission. So really, it depends on if you look at it from a practical standpoint, I think the peacekeepers offer more like I don't know explosive stuff, basically stuff to damage zombies and chase. And the hippies, they give you more of like parkour stuff to kind of leap off of, just to make running like easier, which I guess goes into their theme. um, and then let's see. Yeah, basically though, it takes itself very seriously, and by the end of it, man, it really tries to go for that emotional kind of thing, but none of the characters really feel that like interesting to me. The story is just convoluted and kind of stupid at parts, where like you have to get Rosario Dawson's shoes, and it makes that an entire mission just to find her shoes for her. And yeah, there's a some kind of emotional thing under it where she has a relationship with somebody and and she hates them for reasons, and I don't know. It just didn't really gel well together for me. A lot of it isn't necessarily world building as much as just like interpersonal drama. So instead of feeling like like a grand post-apocalyptic adventure. It felt more like a TV show with, oh, what's this character gonna do next? It's like a serialized soap opera in a way. So I wasn't a big fan of that, and the story itself was kind of long for its own
Making
good.
all this up to impress me.
Speaking of the characters, one of the characters actually in the game is based off of a famous actress, but I don't think a lot of people playing video games are gonna go to themselves like, "Holy crap! Look who it is, Lois! It's famous actress slash producer Rosario Dawson." Like when you have these characters that are based off of celebrities in video games, a lot of what you end up with there is just vanity projects where they're kind of like a cool badass or a Gary or Mary Stu, and basically they can't do no wrong because the agent for the actor is basically breathing down the neck of the developers and wants to make sure that whoever actors are putting into this gets treated like the royalty that they should be, apparently. Now, just as a counterpoint, one of my favorite celebrity cameos in a video game was probably
Hello, Mr.
Postal 2
Coleman.
with
I know
Gary
facts of
Coleman
life.
because it wasn't
You
like,
ever do that
holy
lovely
crap, it's
Tuscadero
Gary
chick?
Coleman. It was like he's basically an asshole who you had to get a signature from, and he gets into a big shootout with the cops, and it's just ridiculous. But the whole thing's just like kind of poking fun of itself. It's not like some agent going like, look, my client is a very important person, damn it, and in your story, they're gonna be perfect, god damn it. So basically, what you're left with is, look, it's a B-list celebrity who is in your video game. Isn't that exciting? And don't get me wrong, now I like her body of work, shall we say. But in terms of the context here, who gives a shit besides their agent? All right, now let's get into the atmosphere of Dying Light 2. Frankly, Dying Light 2 feels like adventure game, kind of like on par with like I don't know, something like Far Cry or some kind of action adventure like thing. And I will say though, the world is very colorful and vibrant, especially during the day. But overall, it does beg for you to like explore it, parkour around it. It is a very inviting world, and it's very big too. I'll give them that. Um, now the atmosphere during the daytime is really peaceful, really. Um, basically, there's zombies on the streets, but they're not even a threat. They kind of just lay there, and you can even walk by them. Not even like video game walk, but just like walk at like a regular pace by them. And more often than not, they're just gonna sit there and not know what's going on. Rooftops are usually where you want to parkour at, just because that's the appeal of the game here. And for the most part, they're really safe. Sometimes you'll run into like a little Mad Max group of bad guys, and you might have to either fight them or flight them. But basically, that's about all you see really during the daylight. That's only like I guess danger, you could say. So it's very colorful. It's very inviting to climb around, and basically, it's like explore me, please, explore me. I'm a very colorful world. Like, come on and play with me, kind of thing. Nighttime is a little bit it's a little bit more dangerous, but not super dangerous, really. It's not as colorful, but you do have a lot of moonlight, so it's not like pitch black or anything. There are more zombies in the streets, and there's ones that will initiate chases with you. Um, but I will say these chases are pretty easy to avoid or get out of, especially with the hang glider. But assuming you don't have that yet, basically you just run and basically get on rooftops, and some of the zombies will pop out on vents. But I mean, they kind of chase you, but you can usually outrun them pretty easily. So either way, the world's not super threatening. It's more of like, as I was saying, like something like Assassin's Creed, where it's more made for just explore and have fun with it. So basically, it's a stark contrast to Dying Light 1's atmosphere. And speaking of Dying Light 1, now I'm going to compare this game to the first one. So I would like to just look at Dying Light 2 on its own merits and say it's an alright game. But when you call yourself Dying Light 2, you're guaranteed to compare yourself to the first one. So let's start off with gameplay here. The parkour system is definitely better in 2, even though you kind of feel like a floaty cartoon character. It is a bit more smooth than the first one. The first one's a little more janky, and it basically feels like a Mirror Edge and Dead Island. But here's something about that parkour system that Dying Light did. Dying Light 2 doesn't really capture, is that it was goddamn unique for its time. It was something that you haven't really seen before, and Dying Light 2's big thing is you can also do the same thing, but I mean, we've already done that. So what is Dying Light 2 offering that's really different in the parkour system that Dying Light 1 doesn't have? Paragliders, a rope that you can kind of swing around with. That's about it. Next, we're going to go over the combat, and the combat in Dying Light 2 is admittedly a bit better with dodge and block, but the thing is, in Dying Light 1, it's not humans that are the main focus, it's zombies. And they come in a bunch of different shapes and sizes, a bunch of different variants, and you kind of got to approach them in different ways. When you do play at first, and you do run into humans that are hostile to you, they're nearly impossible to kill at first. They're at like a really high difficulty level, and until you like really train yourself or get some weapons, they're gonna be OP. So you kind of actually want to avoid combat with humans until a little bit later in the game. And when you do fight with humans, it's a bit less fluid than Dying Light 2. I'll give it that. It's more like hack and slash them and absorb hits, unless you have a ranged weapon, of course. And speaking of ranged weapons, real quick, Dying Light 2 not having guns was fine. You know, it's 15 years after the apocalypse. You would kind of assume there would be very, very scarce ammo at that point, but the combat was, well, it wasn't super combat focused is my point. But was that really an issue? I mean, I didn't think so. The whole selling point was being a parkour horror game. And my issue with the combat in Dying Light 2 is like 90% of it, maybe 95% of it really, is fighting these Mad Max goons, and pretty much all you do is slash at them, dodge back, or block, but they're like the same enemies each time. There's 3 of them. There's like one person that slashes at you. Sometimes they might be bigger. Ooh. You have an archer, which, great. There's some range to it. And then you have like somebody with a spear, but for most of the combat, that gets pretty fucking old. And, well, they're too good for zombies apparently now, but when you fight the people, it just gets so tedious and monotonous, and I'd rather be thrown into like survival horror situations instead of action man, you know? Now the story in Dying Light 1, and let's be honest, it's also shit. But it's not convoluted, and it gives off like a schlocky B-movie vibe. Basically, you're dropped into like a quarantine zone working for the government. You realize government bad, people good, and you're basically going off against this cartoon villain whose motives are to like wax his shitty philosophy to you while shooting all his guys in front of you, even though he means to kill you.
I'm sorry.
It's really dumb, but it's kind of aware that it's dumb, but it kind of takes itself seriously. I don't know, but there's less of it and it's less convoluted, and yeah, there was like a part 2 where this one character you meet for like 2 missions, and then your character's like frantically looking for her throughout half the game, and then you see her again and she dies. Spoiler alert. And he's like, no! Like he's having this mental breakdown over a character I didn't even fucking remember. But there was cool stuff to that story too. Like one of my favorite missions in that probably is where you have to basically set off explosives in an apartment to resemble a smiley face or a sad face, basically to show the outside world there's still people alive in there. And we go into the apartment, and it's really claustrophobic, it's really intense, and that was just part of the story where it wasn't super combat focused. It was more just like a really creepy atmosphere. But at the end of the day, there's no real consequences. Like, you also explode a building full of volatiles, but nothing happens, nothing changes. But at least it kind of, well, That was back in 2015. The second one also has no consequences really in the game. It liked to pretend that it did. Part of its marketing selling point was that it did, but did it really? No. Um, but to Dying Light 1 and two's credit, they both kind of acknowledge that their stories are shit, and they both give you the option to just skip through it. So thankfully, it's not like Metal Gear Solid where you're held hostage for like 3 hours watching cutscenes. So could be worse. And last but not least, the atmosphere. Probably my favorite thing of Dying Light 1. I'm a big sucker for zombie shit. And this world, instead of being bright, inviting, and explore me, feels like rot and decay. And completely different vibe. I mean, if you hear the music in it, you hear the second one, and it sounds like grand adventure is just around the corner, young wizard, or whatever. And then you play the first one, and it sounds like horror. It sounds like decay. It sounds like just death, pretty much, which is fitting for the zombie vibe. And the first one, in general, even during the daylight, is just way more intense. It has way creepier stuff going on. Like, it keeps you on edge for almost all of it, really, just because of A, the sound design, but B, like, just the variety. Even during the daylight, sometimes you get like the 28 Days Later things chasing you, and basically just the whole world sounds hostile. The whole world sounds like out to get you. It does a really good job of just keeping you on edge and making everywhere feel unsafe. Now, the daytime is easier than the nighttime, but it still punishes you more with a survivor point. So if you die during the daytime, the game basically like tells you like, come on, you suck, and takes away points away from you to punish you for such. And the nighttime is, well, that was the famous part of Dying Light 1. It was super intense. You can hear volatiles breathing loudly around you, hunting around. And if you get into a chase, you are running frantically to find somewhere to hide. And basically, it's just super intense. You really don't want to go out at night when you first start playing until you really get used to it. But completely different from the second one, where the second one is just like, if you go on the streets, maybe they'll chase you, but just stick to the rooftops and you'll get a bonus kind of thing. Whereas the first one, like, you really got to know what the fuck you're doing, otherwise you are going to get torn apart very quickly at night. And then I guess another thing about the first one is that the game actually fucks with you too. There's examples like for example, there's a mission where you go to the top of a bridge and you have to change out the lights. And once you get to the top, you open the door and there's like a bomber just right there. And it's just like little things like that that just kind of fuck with you and keep you on edge. That just basically the game's just intent is to keep you on your toes and kind of always on edge, which is cool. I like that. It brought the horror to it. Whereas the second one just feels like adventure game. Like you can go around and have adventures without any real consequences. And yeah, I was really disappointed, I guess, with Dying Light 2 stepping back on the horror and trying to be more like just generic fucking action game like we've had a million times before with like Just Cause or Assassin's Creed or whatever, basically. It just didn't feel different. It didn't feel unique. And it's like, I can play this, but there's a million other games I can play that are just like this. Anyway, in conclusion, Dying Light 2 is okay, but it's not fucking Dying Light. It should have been just its own thing. It should have just titled itself Post-Apocalyptic Spider-Man. Because that feels way more in tune than what Dying Light 1 was doing. And I wouldn't have been so upset about this if the marketing didn't say that it was still like a zombie game. It was still like a horror game.
And of course, terrifying nights when the infected emerge from the depths of the city to feed on anyone they can find.
You're a liar! You're a liar! You know something that you're not telling us, you slimy scumbag liar!
Now, if they were honest in their press releases and they said, look, we're actually stepping down a lot on the scares, on the horror element, and on the zombie aspect, and we're basically going to make it whimsy adventure, man, then fine, I would have respected that. I wouldn't have bought it, but I would have respected that. Now, nagging for the sake of nagging can be boring, so I would give the game some suggestions to basically, and if I would have enjoyed it more, they could have done stuff like this, where, okay, so the zombies are useless in the sunlight. It's 15 years later, sure, that's fine, but make the inside of the buildings threatening. Make them like really intense, and make the zombies inside buildings, even during daylight, just make them threatening for fuck's sake. Like, don't half-ass your zombie like concept on it. Still make them an element to be like worried about and feared in your world. Um, Basically, if you can play around like the light and the darkness even during the daytime, you could have brought up a lot more dynamic gameplay. But as it stands, they're pretty much the same indoors as they are outdoors during the day, and it just makes it pointless. Another thing, since they clearly cared about their story a lot more than I did, suggestion would be to make it less about interpersonal relationships and make it more about world building, the post-apocalyptic world that they clearly put a lot of love and effort into. Stuff like the GRE people being executed afterwards and blamed for the virus, that was a good touch. Little stuff like that would make the game a whole lot more interesting to explore, where it's a bunch of like little stories kind of adding up, instead of making the main focus just like, where's my sister? I gotta find my sister. Like, who hasn't heard a fucking story like that a million times already? Your main story is boring and uninteresting. Make it about building the world. Make it about a bunch of little stories if you really want to have it 15 years down the line. Make it about, I don't know, civilizations that are starting to sprout up and they're like factions, but actually make that part more engaging to the actual story instead of just like, well, do you like the hippies or do you like the police more kind of thing. It's not very interesting the way it is. And two final touches here. As you know, I play games on the Xbox One, and I don't intend to keep doing that. But I made a bunch of little choices here and there, and finally got to the ending cut screen, and the game just took a big shit on me. So I don't really know what ending I got. I'll have to like do some deep diving on YouTube and plug in a bunch of like this or that's to figure out what I got. But at the end of the day, I don't really care. And then another thing is I actually bought this game at full retail value when it first came out, which I haven't done that in years because frankly most video games are kind of ass these days. But I took a chance because I liked the first one so much, and I was so pissed off that this game was just Adventure Man chasing Superhero Man or whatever the fuck that I tried selling it back. Didn't work, but essentially I disputed with my credit card company because Microsoft wasn't listening to my appeal, and I got the entire game for free. So I played Dying Light for the cost of $0, and I'm still disappointed. But if you want to play first-person parkour, man, having adventures and getting into relationship drama stuff, by all means, you probably won't be disappointed. But as somebody who enjoys horror games and really enjoyed the basically fear factor of the first one, even after paying $0 for this new one, it still is a disappointment. It still feels like a completely different thing. And yeah, basically, that's my 2 cents on it. Take care.